This show's about psychology, right? The point of the show is for people who are not so interested necessarily in just the trading Bitcoin for dollars game and are interested more in trading a relationship with money. So a relationship with dollars versus a relationship with Bitcoin. And it's all about the motivations that go behind that. And today we're going to be talking about the dark arts a little bit, the dark arts. I dabble in the dark arts. We all dabble in the dark arts. The dark arts are pre-suasion in this case, psyops, right? We're talking about psyops. You've heard a lot about psyops in the past few days, right? What are psyops? Who's doing them? What do they look like? We're going to break down what psyops actually look like today. And so you can recognize them in the wild because Bitcoin plays in a world now where there's lots of psyops and they're really relevant to Bitcoiners and what's going on. So the reason I bring it up even is because The Economist today ran an article saying that crypto and the far right, the charm of cryptocurrencies for white supremacists, white power, dark money, right? White power, dark money. So where is this coming from? Right, we've heard it before. And on this show, I'm not going to sit here and give you the same arguments. Oh, but people do crimes with dollars. We've heard all those things before, right? Oh, there's criminals who'll use any system. Don't leave me alone. Bitcoin's the same as everything. We're not going to be talking about that. What we're going to be talking about a little bit is how to defend against these attacks, how to get your mind right for them, where they're coming from, and why they're built the way they're built. So, psyops. The one I'm focusing on today is called pre-suasion. Be careful, that's not persuasion. It's a totally different subject. The man who invented this word is named Robert Cialdini, and he wrote a book in 2016 called Pre-suasion. He's probably the most important social psychologist in the world that we know of today. And the two other books, he's quite old now, but the books that he wrote in the 80s and 90s that were of huge influence were The 6 Laws of Influence, so it's all about influence, and The Power of Persuasion. Now, in Pre-suasion, what he wanted to uncover, and remember, this is around the time of the Donald Trump election, right? So this came out right on the heels of that election because it was sort of on everyone's mind. What is it about the way Trump got attention and kept attention that was so peculiar and interesting, and why did it manifest that way? And so his frame for it all became this idea of pre-suasion. And what persuasion basically looks like is this. You have this privileged moment with somebody, right? And you can actually take a focusing illusion, a draft. You can put another piece of information behind that, and it will sort of slip in there, right? Now, the way the human mind works is you have an assumed causality. Tick, 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 that's a dominoes if you can't really see it, right? So this is sort of a moment in time, a key unlocking this brain. Here's a dominoes falling. Your brain can't help but make these conclusions, right? It's the operating system. It's like asking a calculator not to add when you hit the addition button, right? It's impossible for it not to. The human mind is pretty similar in some ways. If we see something, we can't help but react, right? Racism, all those things, we don't want them. They're distasteful for people. So they'll have an instant reaction. What ends up happening is you go into this survival mode, right? Your brain will automatically look for a solution to that problem. It could be anything, right? It could be absolutely anything. And what happens then is you have cognitive closure. Once the answer is there, once you've figured out a way to get over it, you shut down, right? And then accessing that person to persuade becomes very, very difficult. But this is how you unlock it to begin with. Now, I bring this up because with the Joe Rogan, every news story is now through Joe Rogan, by the way. We only talk about Joe Rogan. On this show, on every show, all the time, Joe Rogan. We just talked about Trump, but now it's Joe Rogan too, both of them, right? On all shows, all the time, forever. So here's the thing that happened to Joe Rogan. Dave Portnoy, right? He got the diamond hands now, we say in Bitcoin. He bought 29 Bitcoins of the day, right? Everyone's having a great time. Dave Portnoy, Barstool Sports. He got into a bit of trouble with Business Insider. And he tweeted this weekend when he saw what Joe Rogan was going through. Hey, whoa, this looks familiar, right? I saw some similarities in technique. I see the similarities in technique. So he tweeted that he recognized that technique. A Twitter account called Wocal Distance answered a question from a longtime Joe Rogan guest, Andrew Schultz, who was in that conversation with Dave Portnoy about where did this come from? It looks similar. The technique is similar. Vocal Distance broke it down. And what Vocal Distance said was, if we look at a group called Patriot Takes, they were the first to tweet out the stories of Joe Rogan being racist, right? Let's not hide the racism. We're not trying to say, yes, racist, no racist. For the point of this story, we don't care. We can assume he is racist. All right, that's okay. Patriot Takes wrote or published these videos, a compilation, and then it started to get traction, right? Another group called Midas Touch, which is a super PAC, right? So Vocal Distance breaks this all down in a Twitter thread. This super PAC, now, if you're not American and you don't understand what a super PAC is, Citizens United in the state of Florida in the late 90s, early 2000s, sometime then, decided that US corporations, people could make unlimited political donations. There was no real limit because it was an issue of freedom of speech. If a company is paying taxes, it has a right to say how the taxes are being spent. Therefore, they can donate whatever they want. I'm not here to argue whether that's right or not. I see a lot of merits in the decision, right? If a company is paying tax, well, yeah, they probably should have a right to participate. But what it allowed for was these super PACs that have absolutely no accountability in how they spend money, right? They can just spend money. So the super PAC, run by three brothers, Ben, Brett, and Jordan, I can't pronounce their last name, so I don't want to mess it up, Masalis, are behind this Midas Touch super PAC, right? That funded, we think, the video that said the compilation video and They bragged in public, this got millions of views. Now, today, as I understand, they've said they didn't do it, it's not us, we're not sure, we don't know, I don't care either, we're not following that story, right? All we want to show and underline here is that it's possible to perform these pre-suasion techniques, right? You had a call to censor Joe Rogan, and then these stories sort of come up in the right time. The operating principle of this pre-suasion, and we get into how to protect yourself, one of the most important things to remember is that you need an immediate tie-in. It has to be right after, right? It's got to be right after. And I'll show, here's an unbelievable example, and it'll bring us to what's going on right now in Canada. Because if it's not Joe Rogan, it's the truckers we got to talk about, right? And if it's not Trump, it's Joe Rogan and then the truckers, right? In that order, all news stories. So this story shows that power of persuasion and how weaponized it really is, right? So if you think these brothers like stumbled upon it, like, oh, we're gonna draft behind a big story and find a way for people to associate this racism with other calls for censorship, if you think that's an accident, listen to the story, right? And this is only being, underlined using mainstream media sources because I don't want to mind read and use anything outside of what I think everyone could assume is in the ordinary. So New York Times article from 2020, right? I'd say October 2020, right? So go back in time to 2020. What's going on? It's the second wave is starting of the pandemic. People are a little more afraid. Like the first wave, I was in New York City. We were afraid, right? It was body bags. But the second wave, New Yorkers, what I'll say is hard to make us afraid of it after, right? If you went through the 2020 in New York City in the first wave, everything was a little low key compared to what you were used to. Big ships coming into, hospital ships and all the stuff that was going on, right? Things changed. But nevertheless, the rest of the world was getting their first taste of fear, real fear. And this is what the Canadian military did in our province of Nova Scotia. So that would be like Maine, just north of Maine, right? So this is from the New York Times. This is a title. Canadian soldiers cry wolf, alarming residents. What do you think that means? Well, this is what it means. They let out a public bulletin to the local people saying they had released wolves back into nature. And then they played sounds from that forest of the wolves, right? They played the sounds of the wolves from the forest and told them using forged letterhead from the Department of Forestry, blah, 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 but the official thing, right? Forged letterhead saying we released these wolves and now, oh shit, because you're all at home in COVID, they're roaming free. Don't go outside because they're there. Like because you weren't there, they're there now. They moved in, the wolves moved in, so stay home, right? But they got caught. Now they got caught, and so everyone said, "Oh, it was an accident. They did an investigation, I don't know if the investigation's true. They said, oh, a wife of one of these intelligence officers shared it with a friend. Whoopsie daisy, right? So they had to announce, the Joint Operations Command had to announce that their plans to head off civil disobedience by the public during the pandemic, that was off. They couldn't do that anymore, they said. And then they're only going to use those similar tactics abroad now. They're not going to use them at home anymore. They totally swear they're not going to use them. And anyway, it was an accident because the wife did it, right? It was her. What was she thinking, right? Geez, crazy. So what I mean to say is pre-suasion is real, right? People know about it and use it, right? But the immediate thing is what's important. Immediacy is what's important. And I'll bring it back to the Economist story in that case, and what's going on with the convoy, right? Because pre-suasion in itself is not a bad thing. It's just understanding that people's minds work that way, and that's the operating system. They see something, they will create connections to it, and it will hold their attention if the connection is relevant to them, generally about survival, right? So that's a really important piece. Now, the convoy, right? So we do see that there are countermeasures towards civil disobedience going on in Canada today, right? We're seeing it. And when it came to the money piece, right, the donations being poured in, right, two things happened. GoFundMe said, no way, right? But what did that do to Bitcoiners? Well, obviously, it did our work for us, right? Because we don't have to go out and persuade people anymore, right? This kind of gave us a pre-suasion scenario. Now, the difference, and this is the line between bad pre-suasion and good pre-suasion, at least I think, right? So being in the right place at the right time, in the case of Bitcoin, warning people for years that if you're a political dissent in Canada, United States, they're going to come get your money. A couple of years ago, it's like, come on, give me a break. Like, no one's going to do that, right? But because Bitcoiners predicted it and thought it was going to be there and built systems to manage those things in the inevitability that it happened, according to Bitcoiners, they were in the right place at the right time with answers. So now, if you go into any one of these Twitter threads online, everyone's like, hey, but what about Bitcoin? What about Bitcoin? What about Bitcoin? Basically doing the job of early evangelist Bitcoin for everyone, right? It's become a viral sort of answer to a problem. It's coming into this pre-suasion filter, right? It just gets locked and loaded, the answer Bitcoin to any one of these censorship problems. Bitcoin, 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 right? So that's the way it works immediately if it's been done right and people have spent time cultivating it. Where it doesn't work is when time does pass. In the same way that like fashion looks bad after a couple of years, like what was I doing why did I have my hair like that? Or why did I, the piece breaks down if it doesn't make sense. Right? If it doesn't make sense, it breaks down. You can see the gap if time goes by. Go back and look at like the Charlottesville thing now and tell me if you think that looks exactly real, right? Like go back and see any one of these protests from 5, 6, 7 years ago, even early COVID. Go back to early COVID video, that guy, the one who fell in the subway or something and died, go look at it again. It's a scam. It's a complete scam. You'll see it immediately because we're a little more trained now, right? If you remember that video in COVID, the start of the early COVID time, someone like collapsed on a subway in Shanghai, right? Go back and watch that again, right? You'll see that with time, this effect breaks down rather easily. And that's important, right? That's important. Now, when I mention the convoy, I say it's important, but also in the case of Bitcoin going forward. So we saw Jesse Powell, for example, right? Jesse Powell gave Bitcoin to the Bitcoin convoy, they're raising money in Bitcoin, right? To give to the convoy to support it. So it can't be taken like the GoFundMe folks. But another one that I find important, and this is a totally not related to the negative stuff, but this is a product announcement that Jesse and Kraken, so Jesse Powell, by the way, gave money to the truckers, is also the CEO of Kraken, someone I worked for before. So full disclosure here, I'm a Kraken shareholder, small, but Kraken shareholder. But I want to mention a product that I personally worked on, because it's an important pre-suasion tool for Bitcoin going forward. So Jesse announced on Friday, or Kraken announced, I should say, the start of a proof of reserves tool, right? A proof of reserves tool. So you can understand how much the bank actually has. Now, the way Kraken operates with the Wyoming banking licenses, even if they have money, it's still your money, because the compromise they made with the Federal Reserve over there was that the money would be held in something called bailment, which means it's actually yours. In the case of bankruptcy, you would be top of the priority if you had a deposit with them. So it doesn't change. So the reserves end up being a way for you as a client to tell if it's there, right? And I bring this up because let's go back to the argument about Bitcoin and The Economist and the racism and all that, right? Another big piece came out today on MMT, modern monetary theory, right? So we do not argue for or against modern monetary theory on this show, right? I don't think anyone can understand the complexities of the whole global economy. And there are parts of modern monetary theory, especially the psychological pieces, that I find real, compelling, and more in line with what I'm talking about. The major difference that I have with the modern monetary theory people is an assumption. Their assumption is inflation doesn't matter, right, at all, if you can't, and that interest rates can stay low and inflation can go up because you're getting rid of the borrowing, right? The math is pretty simple on that. You're getting rid of your debt by letting inflation happen if you're not raising interest rates. And there's sort of an idea that that's okay, right? Maybe, I'm not saying yes or no. The assumption for me is no one is exploiting the advantage that's presented by this window, low interest rates and constant inflation and money printing, right? Now, in a world where demand for US dollars, just imagine, time goes by. Remember I said time is the way to understand if you're hallucinating. So that I think is the line, hallucinating, right? You'll see a hallucination, a thing that isn't there, right? Or a thing that must be there for your conclusion to be true. So in the case of white supremacists, you'll have to see them after a while, right? They can't just not be there after a certain amount of time. If they're not there at a certain amount of time, the power is gone, right? So in the case of making sure time passes, and this product that I'm mentioning that Kraken created, the proof of reserves, the reason I think it's so important is because in time, you can't hallucinate away the effects of printing money. And when you're told to say this will work, the assumption is there's no speculative machine like Bitcoin that can exploit the assumptions that people will print money forever and not try to enrich themselves personally, or there won't be anyone losing the trade, I guess is what I'm trying to say, right? So the hallucination after a certain point will break down. Or if it's real and Bitcoiners are the ones hallucinating, we'll find out after a certain amount of time. We can't just keep going on forever in the Bitcoin world and the modern monetary theory world, right? So all this to say, if that happens, right, if modern monetary theory isn't exactly the way they describe, what you would see is demand for US dollar sinking. Demand would sink, right? So demand for the US dollar would sink. If demand for the US dollar sinks, it's a different ballgame, right? Things change very quickly if the demand for US dollar sinks. And then you can start seeing that proof of reserves, which you actually have, becomes the most important sign a bank could offer. It's actual psychological unity, right? You're offering the ability to say we have real assets that you can collateralize. We have wealth that we can lend, that we can use, and that we can do things with. If the demand for US dollar is so low because of manipulations and because assumptions were made that no one would play this game the way they thought, right? If someone finds different ways to play the modern monetary theory game in a different way, then that hypnosis, right, or hallucination will become obvious. So that's the episode for today. If you like the content, follow on Twitter, watch the show, and leave some feedback. So some of that last bit's was a little experimental on my end, but let me know what you think.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Nolan, for sharing. I want to make sure I find and give credit to the person who made me chuckle with this comment. I believe it was, I am the Buddha. This is helping me understand when Rogan is going to prison. But I do want to touch on it if you have a quick second. I know you have the kids and everything, but we talk a lot about like the destruction of the dollar, the destruction of our society, and the psychosis that goes on around it. And I think that this last segment touched on all those points quite beautifully. My question though is, like, we talk a lot of this community of like what happens when this event finally occurs. We've been watching Clown World slowly deteriorate for some time. are we still waiting for that spark, or has that spark already been lit in your mind, in your opinion? Has that spark been lit and it's just secretly starting to burn?
Yeah, I think it's been lit for a while. I think of it in terms of exit velocity, in the same way that Peter Thiel mentioned exit velocity for his own PayPal. It would have been squashed if anyone understood really what it could do, right? And I continue to go back to the original Facebook announcement, the original 2019 Facebook announcement about their coin. And the reason I say that is because that showed the whole field. That showed, it put all the cards on the table. You couldn't from then on say what Bitcoin was capable of or not capable of. It put everything on the table. And if you see Hillary Clinton, who's very smart, right? Let's never, ever, if we're talking about someone who comes from that nation state world, this whole clown world we're talking about, not everyone is a clown. She's really smart, right? She spent her Thanksgiving in America talking about Bitcoin and what kind of threat it posed for the nation state. She did it at Christmas again, right? Those are two American. I don't see much of Hillary Clinton, but I saw her on Thanksgiving Day in America and on Christmas saying, this is a threat to the nation state. This is a real threat. This is happening. She sees the whole field. And so for me, like, what does it happen? They see the whole field. And I thought Bitcoin was beyond earthly forces when we got through the summer of 2019 and Bitcoin looked good, right? If you remember, what ends up happening is that it looks good, right? We go and not all of this pre-suasion stuff worked the way you want. You can't manipulate it because of time, right? There is a certain shared reality, physics, if you will, that squashes the hallucinations, right? So when I see people, if you want UBI, right? If you want UBI, which is an important part of MMT and government spending in charge of everything, what's the cost? We all understand the benefit of a super hyper efficient society, but what's the cost, right? There's always got to be a cost benefit, and it won't be lost on enough people, I don't think. And so we're seeing it happen today, right? We're seeing, even personally in 2019, I changed my career pivot around Bitcoin because I knew that at the time I was doing a lot of, Wall Street, these people, that people, what is it? What's Bitcoin, right? I said that in a world of $50,000 Bitcoin, I'm not explaining to people what Bitcoin is anymore, right? Like that's not a job. That job is gone, right? I can't do that anymore. I got to do something else, right? And in my mind, it was because the nature of the world would just be proving the point. We'd already put the pieces in place for this pre-suasion, right? We'd already done, privileged moments when no one was looking, talking about Bitcoin to empty rooms in 2014, 2015, right? We had a lot of ability to focus at the time on benefits. And here's the illusion part, right? That's the hallucination piece right here. So this focusing illusion, at the time, it seemed not real to people when we would say, no. But Operation Choke Point, a political maneuver to choke banking of, political opposition of the Democrat Party, frankly, right? In 2014, was a real problem. And was going to affect everyone. It wasn't just going to be a one-off. It wasn't just going to be used one time. So I think the process is happening before our eyes, and I'm not worried about it. I don't worry about it much, as long as we have a bit of time and you know how to recognize a hallucination. What is there, or what are you being directed to not notice? But over time, it comes out. Is the debt really a problem? I don't know. I think it is, but I don't know. Right? We'll find out soon. And then I'm pretty, I'm sure I'll be glad I was a Bitcoiner. I'm already glad I'm a Bitcoiner. God, imagine, what happened? Go fund me. I didn't think that would ever happen. Right? Well,
yeah, I was on my soapbox talking about how, like, even looking beyond GoFundMe, and if we go and look at some of these other blockchain technologies that have been created, it's in essence no different. Like, you could literally create GoFundMe can create their entire company on the blockchain and like rebrand themselves and say, we offer you a token every single time a job is complete, a new or a donation drive is completed, a new token is introduced. But ultimately, the inherent flaw is that they are centralized, and someone, whether it is a bad actor internally or by force externally, can take control. And then all of a sudden, regardless of all of the promises you made when you started, we're back to square one. Jesus, it looks like a little bit of a windstorm over where you are.
We got some issues in Barbados this afternoon.
I want to, before I let you go, touch on one final thing that you said in regards to Hillary Clinton. You know, we pound this drum a lot, and I will continue to pound it until everyone realizes it. But those who speak up against Bitcoin, we have to ask ourselves why. And it's no doubt in my mind, people like Donald Trump, people like Hillary Clinton, people like Bill Gates stand to lose the most by leaving the fiat standard, and they lose their billions, millions of dollars. In Trump's case, negatives. Sorry, had to. But, you know, if they're going to stand the most to lose, why would they immediately jump? And this was another thought I actually had over the weekend. Us plebs need to stop begging billionaires and corporations to get involved with Bitcoin for like 5 more years. Honestly, like unpopular opinion, but let us stack the sats and then let them stack sats when it's 6-7 figures a coin.
I tried to, it was a scrapped version. So my system for this show is I give myself an hour to write it. Right. And I tried to come up with a way to talk about this as like punishment one day, as in like people who made you hallucinate or ignore, you know, how would you turn it into a punishment after they're obvious in the future, right? One of the ideas, I couldn't think of the dividing line, like it just got messy and I didn't understand, you know, but I did think of a great punishment. And it is to get them trapped in like incentive traps where like there's no prison, right? We just say like, here's like a UBI thing. You can work and you can't do much on it. You can work and be a little useful, except every minute you spend being productive, we're going to dock your money. So we're going to pay you a little bit to do nothing, or you can work your ass off and get a little bit better. And so make them, you know, stuck in this incentive loop forever. But, you know, that was just crazy stuff.